Welcome to another episode of the People Potential Success Show. My name is Fong, and today we have another great guest. This individual has come highly recommended by lots of people for the reason of him adding so much great value to so many people all around the world for so many years. Whether it's setting up personal computer learning centers to setting up groups of people where it's an economic business advisors board. He's also created the mind shifting community for educators. He's always adding value to people so that they're able to develop better mindsets, better productivity, so that they're able to live the lives that they've always wanted to live. His main mission in life is to grow a mass of people who are happy and live productive lives, who are also resilient and resourceful when it comes to facing challenges, obstacles, and unintended outcomes. He's also the author of the book Mind Shifting, so please welcome author and speaker, Mr. Mitch Weisburgh.
Hi, thank you, Fong, for having me on your show.
Hey, thanks for being here. Always a joy speaking with people like yourself who's been teaching people, adding value to people for so many years and still doing it and doing it great. Is this something that you've always wanted to do? Like, did you come out of school going, you know what, I'm going to do speaking, I'm going to be writing books, I'm going to be setting up all these groups together so that people can live better lives? Is that what you've always wanted to do?
You know that I no, actually, it was
No.
interesting. So my major in college was political science, and a semester before I was supposed to graduate, my dad called me and said that his business was not doing well, and would I leave college early and work for him, but he could not afford to pay me. And so, as I had enough credits to graduate. So I left college a semester early. I worked for his company. And what I didn't know is on Friday, he laid off half the people in the company. And on Monday, his son starts. So I was not well received. Basically, my boss said to me, this is your phone, this is your desk. When the phone rings, it's a customer who didn't get something that they wanted. Your job is to give it to them. I'm sorry, I have to go for 2 days. I'll be back on, on Wednesday. And that was my training, that was my job. So it was a computer service.
Talk about being thrown into the fire right
Yeah,
off the
yeah.
bat. No educational background on the subject, no
No.
experience on the subject. Just, you know what? Just go and take care of it.
Right. So, basically, a customer would call, and it was a computer services company. This is 1975, so nothing is really online. You know, he was one of the first to have a service bureau where people actually connected over dial-up lines to the computer. Customer would call with a problem, and I would go to the programmers, and the programmers would say, "Well, you have to figure out what the problem is. It's probably a user error." And so I wasn't allowed to read their code. I wasn't allowed to really ask them questions. And so what I eventually learned how to do is by listening to what a customer had to kind of understand basically what was probably happening in the computer to cause that problem. And then after the programmers had left for the day, go into the programming room, pour over these printouts of code to try to find out where in the code it was. And then the next day I could go into the programmers and say, I wouldn't be surprised if this was the problem, and you could probably find something related to it here in the program. Why don't you just take a look at it? And that, ability to be able to take what people say, or what's happening on screens and say, well, this is probably what's happening in the computer. That's been extremely valuable for me.
So you mean it wasn't always pull the plug and plug it back in?
Not in those days, right?
So how difficult was it for you to convey that message or ask the developers or coders to do so? Because they've gone through so many years or for such a long time saying, oh, it must be user area. Oh, it must be user area. For somebody to even suggest it's them must have been difficult for you to actually try.
Well, for a kid to suggest to them. But, I was between a rock and a hard place because on the one hand, I have the customers who are saying, fix this, fix this, fix this. And then I have the programmers saying, we're not going to listen to the president's son. He took the job away from friends of ours, and we know what's best anyhow. So it was like, how do they approach them in a way that doesn't get them angry and gives them enough information so that they can be curious and look through their code to see if that was indeed the problem. And it was, it's all that problem solving that's really helped me, and kind of led to me being able to start. You mentioned PCLC, Personal Computer Learning Centers, start training people how to use computers, and then start working with education publishers on how to adapt their products for computers and the way schools actually work, and then eventually to mind shifting how the brain works.
Mhm. Wow. I would imagine that being thrown in that scenario, your skin must have been very, very thick. And then on top of that, you would have to be able to really communicate in order for things to kind of turn around for you. So what did you do during those early days? You had a very unfortunate situation where people didn't want to listen to you. You're young. You're the son of the owner.
Hmm.
People don't want people's lost jobs because of you, so they thought.
Right.
How did you turn that around? What did you say to them? Did you have meetings? What did you do?
It was so first of all, it's what's going on in your brain that allows you then to project. So it's your mindset. And I think that I was very, very lucky in my childhood. I had, especially my mom, an individual who gave us so much self-confidence. So even as these people were telling me, you don't know anything, you're wrong, it's the user error. It's like this feeling of knowing that what I was doing was right, um, was always there. And then the other aspect of my mom was she was horrible at receiving any criticism. So in order to approach her with something, you had to really think through, how am I going to get this message across to her without her taking offense that we're challenging her. And so the combination of having the feelings of self-confidence and understanding how to phrase things in a way that opens people up instead of shutting them down, I think those help me. And then I was just determined that is to have all my I's dotted and all my T's crossed. It's like not just to understand the problem, not just to have a general feel about what could be happening in the computer, but then to go into the code. And then also I learned how to go in at night and through everything was punch cards back then. So I would punch my own cards in order to do dumps of what was happening in the computer's memory. So I could go in and say, something, this is really strange that this is happening, that this is what the computer's core memory is showing. It seems to me that this might be where, what's going on in the computer. And there might be a section in the code, maybe a section about doing this, where you could find what's going on here. And so, um, having the self-confidence, having the ways of communication, and having all the data to back it up just allowed me to eventually become a person that they would go to. After 2 years, I was a person that they would often go to and say, "Hey, we're having this problem. Do you have any idea of how we could solve it?"
Uh, well, how after 2 years, that's when people started going, you know what? Let's start listening to them.
Right, right. Yep.
You mentioned the self-confidence, and that's something I find that a lot of people sort of have some issues with. They're so
Really?
they're so scared about taking action. They're so scared about potential challenges, and it's because of the self-confidence. And the one
Hmm.
thing that lots of people say is like, yeah, just have more self-confidence. Go out there and do it. It's one thing to say it, but it's
Right.
another thing to actually harness it. So for someone like yourself who's been doing this from a very, very young age, how do you harness that self-confidence to go out there and meet challenges, face adversity, and succeed?
So that's really the whole basis of mind shifting. And I'm going to actually take a step back even and say, you have your series of books, make more, work less with Jessica. And those books have a ton of tremendous advice for people to be able to harness their abilities to achieve their desires. And I would probably wager that people can't do that from a feeling of fear and anxiety. So if they're in a mindset of fear and anxiety, then you could have the best advice in the world, and their fear and their anxiety are going to block them. And so the question becomes, how do we change those? reactions into ones that are curious and playful. Because when you have the mindset that, gee, I wonder what's happening here, or that it's like a game, you can pretty much tap into all of your powers and all the powers of the people around you. So, having said that, the studies that I've done have indicated that, this is an oversimplification, but there's really two parts of our brain. There's the parts of the brain that evolved from the earliest multicelled organisms that could move, and that evolved into what a lot of us call the survival brain or the limbic parts of the brain. And those are all dealing with survival. And so you think about, well, what's really necessary for survival? Well, in order to survive, we have to be able to recognize threats and take action and focus the entire organism on combating that threat. Those parts of the brain can't distinguish from something that's just a challenge versus something that's going to kill us. It's a threat or it's not a threat. It's a very binary very binary situation. And then in mammals, we started evolving parts of the brain that surrounded that limbic system, the cortex, and specifically in hominids, the prefrontal cortex, which evolved in the great apes and mostly evolved in people. And that prefrontal cortex is what controls our ability to be resourceful, to be resilient, to be creative, to be critical thinkers, to collaborate and connect with others. So we have that ability, but the survival brains, actually parts of the brain, activate in like 2 to 3 100ths of a second. So it's like, is this a threat? And once they activate, they then secrete fear hormones that then focus the entire organism on that threat and inhibit the ability of the prefrontal cortex to work. So if you want to uh, improve, if you want to learn new things, you have to be able to engage that prefrontal cortex, which wakes up in 2 to 3 seconds instead of 2 to 3 100ths of a second. And in order to do that, you first have to quiet, you have to learn the techniques to quiet your survival brain, and then tap into your ability to empathize, to critically think, to explore alternatives, to collaborate with others, and to embark on things where you're willing to overcome obstacles.
Awesome. I just went through a whole biology class.
Right, right. And I probably talked too long, but
No, that was awesome because like
okay,
you led it to this next thing because you said you have to learn how to quiet that part of the brain.
right.
And I have to ask, what are some of the techniques for people to quiet that part of the brain?
So So that's a great question. And there's really three general mechanisms that people have come up with that quiet that part of the brain. The first thing is you have to cultivate your ability to be self-aware. Because if you're not aware that that you're working from either habits or from fear or from anxiety or just copying what everybody else is doing, then you can't change. So first of all, self-awareness. Now, sometimes just being self-aware is enough to change it. Like I can be in a situation and it's like there's my limbic mind, and just realizing that, boom, I could be playful and curious again. Sometimes after realizing it, you can do self-talk and a number of others solutions. Like if you if you're sure you can't do something, you can't just say to yourself, well, I know I can do it. Or worse, somebody can't say to you, oh, come on, you can do this. It's easy. Because that triggers you to fight against it. So you have to use, self-talk that opens up your brain. So instead of saying, when you hear your voice saying, I can't do this, perhaps you can, maybe just say to yourself, perhaps I can. And so you're not arguing with it. And your brain can't help but start coming up with ways that you could do it with a phrase like perhaps I can't. So there's phrases that work for that for virtually anything where you're locked in, using your survival brain, self-talk mechanisms that you can use. And then the third thing is, sometimes you just have to really quiet that brain, and you do that through distraction. So it could be meditation, it could be mindfulness, it could be taking a walk someplace, especially a walk in nature. It could be doing some art or looking at some art, some hobby that you, dancing, listening to music. So something that just calms that parts of the brain, and then you can do your self-talk and maybe ask your heart or ask your gut, what would I really want to happen at this time? And then go into that playful mode and tap into the powers of the prefrontal cortex.
That is awesome. And as you're saying that, I could picture myself during certain times. I'm like, if I'm going through some big challenges, you know what? I'll stop, turn on some music, kind of drown myself in that for a bit, and then start asking the questions. Well, if it's either can't or maybe. It's
Yep.
either no or hey, let's try it out. And once you start opening that up, you start being more playful, more creative as to possibilities instead
Hmm.
of like hard no's.
Right.
And
Oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, a couple weeks ago, you had a guest. I probably am pronouncing her name wrong. Saki Kajita.
Yeah.
And she. I mean, first of all, there's so much that she talked about, which was really cool. One of the things she talked about was language learning, right? Because she speaks three languages, and she was talking about how kids have this willingness be, to make mistakes because they're going at it from a sense of play and curiosity, whereas adults are saying, "Oh, gee, what if I mispronounce it? What if somebody makes fun of me?" But as an adult, you could go into that mode. You can approach it from, something, I'm going to make a game out of this. Okay, I'm going to see, how long I can continue to talk in this language, even though the other people want me to continue to talk in my first language. Or, I'm every time I make a mistake and somebody corrects me, I'm going to laugh at it. And so you can change your whole mindset, and that's something that she brought up in her talk.
Yeah. A lot of that mindset is like for the adults is because of their assumption of what others will say and assumptions of what others will think about, and
Hmm.
therefore they try and stay in their lanes.
Right.
So, for instance, when people go, okay, I'm going to do a mindset shift, and start thinking this way, acting this way, speaking this way, and then all of a sudden they go, but that's not really me. I don't feel authentic anymore,
Hmm.
and they start stopping that change
Right.
because they're afraid other people are going to say things.
Hmm.
How would you coach somebody who's in that environment for them to be more comfortable with doing that shift, yet still being authentic to themselves and not worrying about the outside noise?
So understand that none of these when you say how would I go about doing it, none of these techniques come directly from me. Okay, all of them come from people from a wide number of fields. So, psychologists very often call that part of the brain that's survival oriented. One of the terms that's used is part X, or one of the terms that uses your internal saboteurs. And so if you can understand that that part X is trying to protect you by not having you change, and in the process of protecting you is making you miserable, then you can tell yourself, something, this is just my saboteurs, or this is just my part X trying to get me not to change, but I can quiet them down. So it no longer, you can't argue with it because it's incredibly wily, and any arguments that you come up with, it's going to be able to come up with counter arguments. I think one of the best examples is this woman who's a friend of mine who's a grief counselor. Okay. And that's hard work because you're dealing with people who are dying and families with people who are dying all the time. So she and two other grief counselors started this group to support each other. And for the first year, it was going really well. And then after a year or so, she felt she wasn't getting much out of it. So there's basically three things that she could do. The one thing is to just continue. One thing is to try to make some changes in it, but to continue. And one thing is to just tell them, I want to stop. So each of those three choices, you say, something, I'm just going to continue. And that part X of hers would come in and say, yeah, that's just what you always do. You always keep on doing the same things that don't work, and that's why you're never going to succeed, and really pouncing on her. So then she's saying, well, something, maybe I'll talk to them and we can make some changes. And then it's like, Yeah, yeah, yeah. You do that all the time. You're wishy-washy. Come on, just make a decision already. You're never able to make a decision, and that's why you're always stuck, and you'll never amount to anything, and nobody's going to like you. And so that part of the brain was on her, and then it was like, well, you know something, maybe I'll just stop it. And that part of the brain was like, you know something that is so typical of everything you do. You never stick with anything. Every time you try something, you stop it, and that's why you've never succeeded in your life, and you'll never amount to anything. And so, she kept on going round and round with those different things. So what she did is she says, you know something, this is probably my saboteurs. And so she then did 20 minutes of mindfulness. Just in her case, it was concentrating on her breathing and concentrating on the chakras and finding the energy in the chakras. And when she was calm, she asked her heart and her gut, you know something, what would I most want here? And what came back is what she would most want is to talk to the people and say that she was finding that this was not particularly helpful anymore. And what did they suggest? And sure enough, the part X came and said, yeah, 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 you can't make a decision. And she just came back and said, you know something, part X, I heard you. I'm done with you. This is what I'm going to do. And so kind of kidding and just not arguing with it, but just saying, no, 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 I'm just not listening to you. So she talked to the three people. And what happened is or the other two, and they said, you know something, we're going through the same doubt. And what we think is that this was really valuable for us for our first year, but now it's played out. And thank you so much for bringing it up. And so it's that technique of saying, you know something, I'm self-aware. I understand that this is my saboteurs. I can't argue with them. Let me quiet them down. And once they're quiet, let me find out what I really want. And I'll just say one more thing on this is that sometimes we can't just do that for ourselves. Okay. Sometimes we're just too close to it. So, one of the things that happened to me recently is we had a family crisis, I guess. And I was really, really angry. And, and I knew it was my saboteurs. I knew it was my part X that was doing it to me. I, 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 I went through meditation or mindfulness for about 10 or 15 minutes. Sorry. And it worked a little bit. And it was like, you know something? I need somebody. So I called my son, and he's an adult. Okay. So I called my son and said, his name is Herbie. Herbie, I'm really, really upset about this. And, I need to now channel my sage parts of the brain. And he's like, Dad, you wrote a book on this. He says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go back and I'm going to use some of the techniques on you that came from your book. And having another person do that for me, like a coach, um, allowed me to calm myself and figure out what was really important to me and move forward.
Awesome. I was gonna mention that. I'm like, sometimes to quiet that part of the mind is to have other people around you that supports you, that pushes you, that challenges you, and also outlines that it's not that big of a risk or it's not that big of a challenge because
Yep.
they've been there and they've done that. And it makes a world of difference when anybody is wanting to achieve things that they've never tried before.
Yep. And that's one of the reasons why I have this goal of a critical mass of people. It's one thing, I can reach one person here, one person reads the book, one person takes my course. They teach a few people, but we have what 8.5 billion people on the planet. What if we could get a critical mass of people so you could always find other people who thought this way and work together with them in these kind of islands of coherence so that you could find a way to move forward. That's my mission is to have some number of people so that we could always find others and really start moving forward with all the problems that we face as society and the world and our communities.
No, you've worked with people from all over the world and of all different ages, background, cultures. Have you found anything that is difficult when it comes to projecting this mindset in different cultures?
So that's a really interesting question. And I think that you have to be culturally sensitive as you're talking to people. But as long as you're culturally sensitive, as you say, I've worked with people from Niger, I've worked with people from Europe, I've worked with people from South America, I've worked with people from China. Um, I think people get it because in at our core, we all have this limbic part of our brain, and we all have this prefrontal cortex, and the idea resonates with people.
And that's very, very important. And I
Hmm.
find the same thing. Regardless of cultural backgrounds, the core of what people want is fairly the same. They
Yep.
want to
Yeah.
succeed. They want to be good people. They want to do certain things. And the cultural aspects you could kind of weave in and out and kind of adjust accordingly to fit their way of life and their culture and whatnot. Now, we kind of verged off of your origin story and got right into the nitty-gritty of the mind and how things work. You mentioned the book mind shifting. What was that transition like for you to be running this company for your dad, and then all of a sudden you go, you know what? I want to actually do this. I want to be that person that goes out there and educate people and train people and coach people and
Mhm.
become your own like entrepreneur, writing books. How did you make that transition?
So the transition to writing the book happened from a more recent business. So I worked for my dad from 1975 to 1980. And then I ran the business training people how to use computers from roughly 1981 to 2000. And my most recent business was working with education publishers. I was known uh, for instructional design. I was known a little bit for marketing, and I was known for understanding how systems worked. And so, because of my background, I was a guest lecturer at times for the University of Pennsylvania for their joint degree program between entrepreneurship and education. And so I would go down once a year. They were running I would teach a half day session on what the education market was like. So I was on their mailing list, and they sent an email out saying there was a university in Niger, not Nigeria, but Niger, which is really about the poorest country in the world. Uh, the University in Niger, where they wanted U.S. edtech entrepreneurs to talk to their undergraduates about education technology. So I wrote to the head of the university and I said, I really don't think it's going to help your people much to talk to a U.S. edtech entrepreneur because our education system is so different and our technology, the way we use it, is going to be so different. And then as I was writing that, I don't know why this idea came to me. He says, but it was like, wouldn't it be great if kids really learned how to use their minds? So it was like, you know something, I could do a session for your undergraduates on how the brain works, how we make sense of situations, and how to be productive even in the face of obstacles. And then he wrote back to me and we ended up talking and we agreed that I was going to teach a 2 day workshop, actually two-day workshops. Each one would have 60 to 70, I'll call them kids, but 18 to 25-year-olds, on what at the time I was calling sense making. So, we shook hands in June. I was supposed to call it there in February. And then it's like, Mitch, you idiot. You don't know how to do this. How are you going to teach kids how to make sense of situations? I'd studied neurolinguistic programming. I'd been through the landmark series of courses. I'd done a lot of reading on it, but still. So what I did is I had 6 months, so I read 11 books on different topics, economics, all having to do with how we make decisions, economics, psychology, coaching, selling, um, teaching, neuroscience, cognitive science. So all these different areas, and each part had their own view of how the mind works and how we can be effective, but nobody really had pulled it together. So I pulled it together into a 2 day course, flew out to Niamey, the capital of Niger, ran the first 2 day workshop for 65 kids. And at the end, I'm like, and that's sense making. And they stood up and cheered. So it's like, these are people who are being groomed to run the country, to bring Africa forward. And nobody had really spent time with them about just because our brain thinks something is true doesn't make it true. And just because we think we can't do something or we think this person is wrong or we think that we know how to do something, that doesn't mean that we do. if we're angry with a person, that doesn't mean that they were wrong and we were right. It just means that we're angry with them. And so and you can control your own reaction. And nobody had ever spent time with them, teaching them these tools. And that's when I knew that this is something that really resonated once people knew how to do it. And so that was in 2018 that I did the class. And so I transitioned, that's really my focus right now. That, it's like, how do I get these skills into 5 million people?
That is awesome. And that led to the book.
And so the book, sorry, so the book came out of a lot of people have told me, Mitch, you have to put this into a book. And I'm like, you can't learn this from a book. You can't learn how to ride a bicycle from a book. Okay.
Right.
These are mind things that you have to practice. You have to try out. You have to get feedback on. You can't read a book at it. But people said, you know, you have to write a book. And then I've been focusing on reaching teachers with the idea that if I teach teachers, A, they'll live happier lives. B, they'll be better able to relate and connect with the issues that their students are having. And C, they can start to teach their kids these things so the kids become easier to co-regulate and eventually learn how to self-regulate. And so it leverages teachers in getting this message across. In order to reach teachers, you really need to go through states. And so the thing that finally convinced me was somebody said, states aren't going to accept Mitch Weisburgh, but Mitch Weisburgh, author of the book on mind shifting or the series on mind shifting, yes, they might listen to you. So, and people said, it doesn't have to be a big book. It could be 40 pages. And I started writing, and it's like, something, if I'm going to write a book, I want to write a book that has the potential to really help people. And so it's going to be eventually 3 different books, but the first book was on the brain itself. And so it's mind shifting, stop your brain from sabotaging your happiness and success. And it's filled with techniques that allow you to recognize when your brain is not helping you, how to quiet the brain, how to talk yourself um, into a more resourceful and resilient and happier frame of mind, and then how do you tap into the powers of the prefrontal cortex so that you can collaborate with others, you can think critically, you can overcome obstacles, and you can accomplish what you want.
I like that story because of the fact that sometimes a person doesn't want to write a book. They don't need to have that book written and all that kind of stuff for the self-credibility. However, it's that self-credibility that gets people to notice you. It's to
Right.
get you to be able to present stuff. And in the end, if people don't read the book,
Hmm.
you actually get the opportunity to speak with them.
Yep.
So it's a ways to a means. And
I
lots of
had
people don't really understand the power of what that book can actually get you, and that is exposure and connections and
right.
relationships.
And I had just a wonderful experience yesterday. I have some friends who are artists who've done a virtual art exhibition in Las Vegas.
Mhm.
And the exhibition is how art can influence culture. And so I attended their webinar on it along with a bunch of other people, and they're going through their art exhibit. And about 40 minutes into the art exhibit, they started going into all the problems that they faced with the city, with the bureaucracy, with creating this exhibit, and they started talking about the techniques that they used from the book in order to stop themselves from obsessing over these problems and be able to come up with solutions. And like and I said, you have to read Mitch's book because when we did this, we were both stuck in this problem mode, and we realized, something Mitch said that if we do this, we can relax our survival brain, and then we can tap into our creativity. And they said, darned, if it didn't work over and over again. So it's just like so cool because I didn't expect it. And hearing the call out was to me was very rewarding.
Yes, that is very, very awesome, especially when you have that third party recognition for somebody else to bring it up. That does wonders. You mentioned about sense making, and there's a saying where common sense is not so common. How
Right.
does one develop better common sense?
So. So Will Rogers actually called it horse sense. Um, and he says it's stable thinking. Um, and it's something that jackasses don't have. Um, so, so how do you develop common sense? And I guess another truism is that you develop common sense from making mistakes. Okay, so you make mistakes, you learn from it, and then that improves your common sense. Common sense evolve resides in your limbic system. So those are the things that you know how to do well. And one of the great aspects of the limbic system, which is your survival part of the brain, is that the limbic system is trainable. So the more things that you learn from different different disciplines, and the better you learn them, the more they become habits and the better your common sense. So if you go into situations and you look at them as opportunities to learn, and then you practice using those things, then you slowly or over time you develop your common sense. Does that make sense? Or
For sure, of course it
okay.
does. Something else that we kind of talked about before is making good decisions at critical times.
Hmm.
And sometimes those situations doesn't give you a lot of time to kind of quiet the brain and think about it and ask yourself questions and all that kind of stuff. You have to make those decisions fast.
Right, right.
How does one train themselves to the point where they can make those fast decisions that are critical?
So so you train yourself but to make those fast decisions by using skills that have become habits that are fluencies with you. And again, I'm going to go back to Saki Kajita, who was talking about how when she speaks, she makes sure that she rehearses what she's doing. And as a matter of fact, when you were talking with her, you talked about in your singing that you do that also. So you have to make a conscious effort to entrain your habits and your fluencies so that when you're in the moment, you can draw on your abilities. Now, those habits and fluencies aren't always going to be the ones that are going to solve the problem. Instead of knocking yourself and say, "Oh, geez, I screwed it up," I'm just, I'm an idiot. When it doesn't work out, it's like, okay, I didn't have the skills for that. Let me take a look at that. What skills would have allowed me to approach that situation better? Then to practice those skills so that they become fluencies. So the next time you're in a similar situation, you'll be able to draw on them.
Very, very well said. And something that I encourage lots of people to do is try something new all the time.
Yep,
Ask yourself, when was the last time you did something new or something different? And by putting yourself in different situations, new environments, that allows you to train your mind to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And lots of people are so afraid of being uncomfortable that they just stop in their tracks and then stay home.
yep.
So it's something I find that's very, very important.
And it isn't the situation either. It's your reaction to the situation. We can react to a situation and say, this is stressful, this is anxious producing, anxiety producing, or we can react to a situation and say, something, this is really motivating. And and those two mind frames are really just in our head. So to the extent that we can look at a situation and say, how can I turn this into a motivating uh, problem or challenge rather than a demotivating stress, is something that's going to really propel us forward.
Now that you mentioned that, what is the most unique situation that you've personally been in where you converted a demotivating stress into something that was an opportunity for you to grow?
Well, I'll say one was when I got myself into teaching this course for the University of Niger, and yes, I have no idea what's going to happen, but I know I can do this.
Mhm.
So that was one. Sorry, um, kind of much smaller example. I was in the Maldives, and I was in an airport. We had booked a flight and we were only supposed to be in the airport for maybe an hour. and they transferred me into a flight where I was going to be in the airport. Our whole family was going to be in the airport for 7 hours. And it's this tiny airport with absolutely nothing to do. And, I talked to airlines, and there were other flights that they could have booked us on, but no, 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 there's nothing we can do. And I was becoming angrier and angrier, and all of us were. And it was like, you know something? Let me just, let me just calm down. I wonder if I'm going to be in this city now for 5 more hours, what is the absolute best thing that I could do? And what popped into my mind was, something, I'll bet you we could take a walking tour. And so went around the airport, found a guy who could give us a walking tour. We took the boat into the city. We learned the history of the city. We had breakfast. Um, we went into some mosques. We went into the marketplace, and it was just a very enjoyable day. And it came from being able to say, something. Forget about what I expected to do. What's the best thing that could happen right now? And then there was a side benefit because when we got back to the airport, the lines to go past security were 2 hours long. And he says, you know something? I know all these guys. He says, just follow me. And we went around the line and went to the security guy, and he says, these guys are friends of mine. Let them through. And we just walked right in.
Oh wow. You changed a uh major delay layover into a vacation slash VIP access.
Yep. And I just, like, and anybody can do that. It's just as a matter of being open to like what could happen fantastic.
Mhm. What is your daily routine? Because the fact that you're able to think this way means you're fairly positive most of the time. And
Yes.
positivity is not something that comes easy for a lot of people. For
Hmm.
for instance, somebody misses their call and they're like, "Oh, what a jerk." They don't
Yep.
recall back and they instantly jump into this conclusion that people hate them or they hate them and all that kind of stuff. How do you maintain a positive mindset so that you're able to think creatively and
Well,
constructively?
mhm. No, and that's really good because these things happen to me too. I'm just as human. I'm not special. I'm just a normal person. So when I screw up on a meeting, or I miss a meeting, or I try something and it doesn't work out, I get just as down on myself generally as anybody else. And then it's the realization that something, this is a human reaction. This is my survival brain trying to protect me, but actually making me miserable. Let me quiet this down and let me recover from it. And so it's again begins with self-awareness.
So you wake up positive right off the bat?
Not no, not necessarily.
No.
But I do wake up and I make it a point every day to do about 15 minutes of mindfulness right after waking up. And research shows that that does tend to fuel you for the rest of the day. You may need to do mindfulness when you get into other situations also, but that just provides a base so that you're more likely to be able to overcome obstacles.
No, I know everybody has a certain way of doing mindfulness. What's your way?
Well, if I have the option, I use an app. I happen to use Insight Timer, which happens to be free, and they have hundreds of thousands of mindfulness exercises. So I just look at how much time do I have, what exercises are out there that I haven't heard of or I haven't used before, or that I really liked and I use again. And then I'm also not 100% fluent, but I'm pretty fluent in Spanish. And so what I've done with Insight Timer is I've had it set to give me mindfulness exercises in Spanish, and it has a double benefit because A, I'm mindfulness. Two, I'm learning my Spanish, and I guess the third thing is people who are doing mindfulness exercises are speaking slower. So I don't have to worry about these rapid Spanish speakers. It's very slow. And I know my Spanish has improved because when I'm walking about town and I see, and I see somebody and I can start talking to them in Spanish, I can do it a lot better than I could have a year ago.
Awesome. Before I let you go, I got another main question for you, and that is, what is one message that you would like to share with everybody that you want people to remember Mitch for?
I'd like everybody to know that you can't control the situation. What you can control is your own reaction to the situation. And so when the situation occurs, even if your first reaction is negative, anxiety, fear, or the thing that you're anticipating doing, and your reaction is fear, anxiety, or sure that you can do it, you can change that. And by changing that in your own mind, you will be significantly happier. You'll live a life from curiosity and a sense of play, and you will also end up being a lot more successful.
Awesome. Nicely said. Great words to live by. Uh, Before we conclude this, I got five rapid fire questions for you. Give me the first thing that
Okay.
comes to mind. Stranded on the desert island, one food to eat for the rest of your life, no consequence.
I'm a fruitaholic. So virtually any fruit.
Nice choice. Hollywood calls and goes, "Hey, Mitch, we would love to do a biopic of you. Who would you cast to play you?"
So so I identify with Gandalf. And so I would have Ian McClellan, although he may not be acting anymore, but I would love to have him play me.
That is awesome. You're on a long road trip in the car, and for some reason, there's only one song that plays over and over again. What's that song that you don't mind listening to without getting sick of?
I think it would be there's an artist called Little Jackie, and she has a song, "The World Should Revolve Around Me." And it's like, wow, that's really cool. Yeah, the world should revolve around me. So I could listen to that. And it's very motivational.
Um, so Gandalf or Sir Ian McKellen shows up at your door and goes, "Hey, let's hang out, but before we head out anywhere, I'm kind of hungry." And you go, "Hey, sir, no problem. Come right in. I'm gonna fix you something nice." What's that one special dish that you could prepare at any moment in time?
So I think it would be a butterflied leg of lamb, as long as I had one. I That was the first thing I cooked for my girlfriend at the time, 40 years ago, who's been my wife for 40 years. And so I would say that would be my go-to dish.
Well, it sounds like it worked. So
Yeah,
congratulations on that. Last question. Give me a number from 1 to 5.
3.
One, two, three. So the word is essential oil. If you were to use essential oil as a metaphor for success, how is success like essential oils?
So when you use an essential oil, a lot of that is the fragrance of the oil, which then penetrates into your deepest core, evoking memories and a feeling of happiness and joy. And evoking that feeling of happiness and joy and memories, whether you're projecting in the future or you're thinking in the past, is probably one of the best ways to live a happy life.
I see that. And so that's how success is like essential oils.
Hmm.
Thank you very much for your time, your wisdom, the advice that you've given here. Do you have any final words that you would like to share? And also, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So I'd like people what I'd like to share is for people to use self-empathy, for people to understand every one of us is a unique and wonderful person, and each and to honor yourself and to really feel that about yourself. The best ways to get in touch with me is probably on LinkedIn, Mitch Weisberg. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. And then I run a newsletter, which is at blog.mindshiftingeducators.org. And so you can sign up for the newsletter, and also on that link, there's a links tab, and so that will link you to places where, if you're interested in this book or the other books that I'm writing, um, how to find the book or some of the other things that I do.
Awesome. Well, looking forward for the next two books that's going to be coming out soon. And for everybody, make sure you connect with Mitch, obviously he is like an expert when it comes to how the mind works and how we can think things through and calm our minds down and all that great stuff for us to succeed and live better lives. So get in touch with him, pick up his book, and until next time, Mitch, Fong, until today is the day to lock your peak potential. We'll see you later.
Thank you.